Hey, in this video I will explain the basic rule in a nutshell of Tanto Monta, the rise of Ferdinand and Isabella. This is not a video about the full rule sets, but just to explain it in a nutshell for new players. Tanto Monta plays with 4 players. One player is a Muslim, one player is Portugal, the other one is the Spain Kingdom, and the fourth player plays as France. On the left side of the map is the victory point track. The goal of the game is to achieve victory through 3 different ways. You are either the first faction that ends a turn with more than 7 VP than everyone else, or if you are able to place all those square markers on the map, which are keys, you win an automatic military victory. If by the end of the 7th turn there was no previous winner, then the player with the most VP wins. There are different ways to score VP in this game. First, by controlling those square space called keys, those triangle-shaped space called strategic spaces. Also, sometimes some of the event card that you'll be able to play during the course of the game will just straight tell you that you gain VPs. Then, most factions also, by the end of each turn, will be rolling dice to see if they successfully trade with other countries and kingdoms. Those trades might give you resources tokens, and some of those might give you points that you can use for action, but some other will also give you VPs. Actually, on the day you will be playing, each player receives an 8 card with a list of all the VPs they can achieve, when and how. I'll be covering some of those later. Alright, now a quick overview of each faction. Every player will usually control 2 kingdoms. The Muslim player is green. Let's get on the map. They will be controlling the North African Alliance, which is dark green. The Nasrids, who are olive colored. And from turn 4, the Berbers in light green. Then we have the Spanish player who controls the kingdom of Aragon and Castille. Aragon is in red and Castille is in yellow. They really play as a single faction, actually. The French player controls, well, the Kingdom of France, but also the Catalonies, which are trying to fight against the Kingdom of Aragon. This is more a minor faction. Similarly, the Portugal Kingdom player, aside from playing the Kingdom of Portugal, is also controlling, in light green, the Beltranejos. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly, but basically this was a small civil war for the control of the throne of Castille between Isabella and the Beltranejos. On the game board, you'll see that some of the space doesn't have a particular color, they are gray. Those are called independent spaces. If there are units on those spaces, they don't really belong to any player or any faction. They are just independent states. So just as a sum up of all the major factions in the game are the Kingdom of Portugal, siding with the Beltranejos, the Kingdom of Spain, with in yellow Castille and red Aragon. Further east is the French Kingdom, who is also siding with the Principality of Catalonia in beige. And lastly, we have the Muslim player who is controlling the Nasrids, who control the south of Spain, the North African Alliance, and later on, from turn 4, the Berbers in light green. You also have minor factions, which are not player control at the start of the game. Venice, the Pope, Naples, Genoa, and Naval. if you want to control those units, or if you want to declare them war, you have a diplomatic display where each player can increase their standings with this minor power, and some events will make you roll dice to see if you succeed in controlling those units and expand your influence with those smaller kingdoms. Now let's get a look at the spaces on the map. There are 4 main shapes. First, you have the unfortified space, which are the small circle. Usually those spaces are of lesser value, they don't offer any VPs. Another kind of unfortified space are the strategic space with a triangle shape. Those spaces give you VP when you control them. Then you have the fortified space. Those spaces are harder to take control of because you need to lay siege, and usually it will take you a couple of turns, or impulse as called in the game, to take control. There are 2 kinds. First, you have the fortress. The same way as the circle unfortified space, those doesn't give you VP when you control them. You also have the square shape spaces called keys. When you control one of those keys, usually you will get 1 VP. You will note that on your player board, you will have a few keys that give you 2 VPs. That's because those are your home keys, basically the cities that make up your kingdom. And if you lose control of those spaces, you will be losing VPs. And as marked here, those are usually required to win. You need to control all of those cities. The exception is for the kingdom of Spain, where you don't really need to get control of your cities for some reason. Let's mention the color of each space. You will see that some of those spaces are in plain color, matching one of the player faction. Those are called home spaces. Basically, it's the spaces where you will be able to build units or to retreat during winter. When you take control of a space that is not one of your home space, you will be putting a marker on the space to mark that you conquered it by the means of military means or by event or diplomacy. When you take control of a space that isn't one of your home space, you'll be placing those markers to mark that you just conquered it, either by military means or diplomacy or events. Each major faction in the game has a marker with this color. This is a marker for the Spanish player. This is the marker of France with the Principality of Catalonia that they are also controlling. This is the North African Alliance marker in dark green with the Nasrid kingdom from the south of Spain. This is the Kingdom of Portugal marker in pink, and the Beltranejos faction of Spain in olive. The triangle shape, as a reminder, is for the strategic space, the one that gives you 1 VP when you take control of those. When you control a space that isn't yours and it's a strategic one, you just put a marker like this. You know there are 2 kinds of shapes for those markers. The hexagonal shape, you can place them in circles space and on the fortress here. In a similar way, when you control a key, the square-shaped space that isn't yours, you take 1 square-shaped markers from your player board and you place it in the space you just conquered. Let's say Marseille is now owned by the Portuguese. Yay! This also means that once you placed all your square-shaped markers and all of your home keys are controlled, that's an automatic victory. But if you are Spain, once again, you don't need to control any of your home keys. Now let's get a look at the units that makes up the game. You will notice that those units are organized by stacks. A stack in this game is called a formation. It is made up of land units, leader, and also naval units. So for example, let's look at this formation, which is led by the leader called Tremoille of the French kingdom. This is a leader. The first figure on top, the highest it is, the best this leader is in battle. The second figure, in yellow, means how many units they can take with them. The highest, the better, of course. Here we have 2 land units with a strength of 2. Once again, the higher the better. Here another land unit, and notice how they have a multicolor shape, as opposed to those black figures here, which are also land units, called militias. What's the difference between militias and infantry? Militias are usually more difficult to control. During winter, they may disband, but also your opponents might have some event cards that make them leave the battlefield. So be careful about balancing your formation between regulars and militias. Next, we have the cavalry. If you have a horse on one of those markers, that's a cavalry token. Cavalry are as strong as militias and regulars, but they allow you to make cavalry charge. Basically, you take some risk for potentially make more damage. And lastly, we have the artillery markers, which allow you to score more hits, possibly during sieges. You'll see that if you want to see that if a leader can hold that many units, take that many units with them, you just add up the sum of the figures on those counters without considering artillery and cavalry. You just count the land units. Here, Tremor has 6 land units with him. He could take 4 more. Every faction also has naval units that he can build. This is a naval squadron. It's your basic naval unit in the game. Those are naval leaders. They can add you roles on each naval battle you may enterprise. And the North African player also has a unit called Corsair, which are better for piracy. Naval units in this game has 3 purposes. Control the sea, obviously. You can also deploy units between different cities and spaces by placing a naval unit in a sea, and that will allow you to make a naval move to transfer land units between 2 lands separated by a sea. Also, even those regular units will allow you to make piracy attempts. Piracy is another way to win VPs, basically taking the goods of the trade of your opponents. You will notice that some of the spaces which are adjacent to a sea zone have this anchor symbol. Those are simply ports, and any of your naval units can go in a port if they want. They are considered as a space, and it also means that your enemy could come and directly fight you in your ports. The last kind of naval units is called nao. A nao is basically a galleon which was used for exploration of the New World, and it has 2 attributes, a crew attribute and a piracy attribute. The higher is the crew value, the best it will be at navigating, and the higher is the piracy value, the better it will be at doing piracy on either the main map or the exploration map, which I will mention and explain later. Let's get back on land to explain the connection. Each space has lines that connect them to other space, and there are 2 main kinds. The plain black line are the most basic one, and you can simply cross them for 1 command point. I will mention what is a command point later, but basically you'll be playing card and taking action on those event cards, and you can distribute those points to make moves, fight, and battle. Crossing one of those plain lines costs 1 command point, and crossing one of those dash lines, which is called a pass, which is basically a road in the mountain and which is harder to cross, cost 2 command points. Each sea zone is also separated by one of those thick blue lines, and basically when you'll be taking naval moves, also expanding command points, you'll be moving your naval squadron between those areas, usually for 1 CP. Part of the map that covers the Canary Island, which while it seems off map, you can actually reach the Canary Islands by sailing through the Gulf of Cadiz to the Cap Molador, and here you are in the Canary Island. On the right side is the exploration map. Only Naos and Naval Squadron, which are here, may reach this part of the map. This map is harder to navigate, and you will be basically rolling dice to see if your Naos can enter a sea zone, if you successfully explore it, and if you successfully cartography such ocean zones when you arrive, it may be a source of VP if you roll very well. Once again, the best the crew, the most likely you will get those cartography VPs. Usually, the player that arrives first or second will be the one that get the chance to get those VP. And secondly, you'll see that this exploration map has round space. You can use those nodes using naval moves to create settlements like this. Every settlement potentially can be covered with the resources, and at the end of each turn, the more settlements you have in this exploration map, the most likely you will return home with those, and they can give you units, VPs, or additional cards. There's one particularly important area on the map, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, and it's made up of 3 spaces: Ceuta, Tangier, and Gibraltar itself. Those 3 spaces are keys, so they are quite important, and there are several rules that dictate what happens in this space, but in a nutshell, if your faction controls one of those keys, you can cross the Strait of Gibraltar with your ships. So for example, here, right now, the Portuguese control Ceuta, and the Muslim player controls Tangier and Gibraltar. So he could cross the strait without any problem. If I was the Spanish player, although, I would need to be allied with either of those players to be able to cross. Another space which is worth mentioning is the Paris space, which is the home key of the French player, which can only be controlled by the French. The other players cannot go there and take control of Paris. It's just out of play. Now let me cover the bulk of the game, which are the event cards. A phase of the game is called the action phase, and that will be when you'll be playing a hand of event cards for either the event or for the value. There are different kinds of cards. The most important one are called the home card, and basically it's a card that you will get back in your hand every turn, and it's associated with one of the kingdom, one of the faction, which as a player you control. So for example, those are the home cards of the Portuguese player. This one is the Portugal home card, and this one is the Beltranejos home card. When you use one of those cards, usually for the value or for the event, you'll be able to only build or move the units of this faction. This is a special rule. The other kind of cards, this one is a mandatory card. When you play this card, you don't have really a choice. You will get 3 command points, which you can distribute through different actions. But whatever happens, the events in red will be implemented. And usually, after that, this card is removed from the game. It doesn't go to the discard pile, and it's just completely removed. You'll notice that sometimes those mandatory cards will say that it is mandatory by the end of turn 1, 2, or 3, which means that at the end of this turn, if the card is still in the deck, it will be implemented whatever happens. So as a player, you can kind of delay those events by not immediately playing those cards. By the end of the day, at the end of the turn, those will happen. And you cannot hold cards which are mandatory from one turn to the other. Then we have the response card. Very simple. Usually you play those cards out of turn to answer to an action that another player took. The combat cards are kind of like the response card, but you play those either on your own turn if you're part of fights, either of the side, or also if it's not your turn but you are part of this fight, you can choose to play a combat card to help you or to hinder your opponents. And lastly, we have the regular events, who doesn't have a header of any kind. You can just play it for the events or for the command point value. Okay, now I want to quickly show you the player board. The 4 players, each of them will have a board matching the main kingdom they control. So once again, we had the Muslim, Portugal, Spain, and the French. Let's focus on Portugal for this example. First, each faction has a leader. For example, right now, Chawn Harlow II, King of Portugal, is controlling the Kingdom of Portugal. Each leader has 2 values, a charisma value, which dictates the base number of cards you will get every turn, and an admin rating, which dictates how many cards you can hold from one turn to the other. Those cards cannot be a mandatory event, and home card will just basically go back in your hand at the end of the turn. Then we have fortress markers. Those fortress markers, you have an action that will allow you to place them in home keys. So for example, as the Portuguese, I can build fortress in my home keys, but those must be unfortified space. I cannot build a fortress in a strategic space. It has to be one of those round space, unfortified space. And when you take this action, tada, it's fortified. And now your enemies need to lay siege to this space if they want to conquer it. It's good to hinder movement and to gain time. Usually those markers will come back, you'll get 1 back at the end of each turn. So if you build 2 within a single turn, you'll get 1 back during the winter phase. You also have a dungeon, which is the space where you will place enemy leaders which you capture. If you win a fight and every unit has been eliminated and only the leader remain, you basically capture him. And he will stay in a dungeon, giving you some benefits. You can ransom him for resources, or during the diplomacy phase, you can discuss with the owner of this leader to see what may be done, maybe to free him. You know, that's just a simple blackmail. Then we have the warehouse. The warehouse is very simple. It's a space where you will put the resources that you get through events or trade, which happens at the end of each turn. Those resources, the one which you will place in your warehouse, are the one that give you command points. You can use the resources after you play a card to extend your turn and take additional action. Some of those resources might be VPs, as I previously explained, and they will go in your VP markers side. You should note that you can only extend an impulse, which means using the resources to get additional points, only once per impulse. You cannot use 2 resources in a row to get, let's say, the value of your card, which might be 2, plus 6 CP. We'll have to use one of those markers, but not both. Those university and technology space here, you don't really have to mind them too much, but basically there are events that might come up giving you VPs for the university box and some bonus to cross the exploration map if you play this maritime technology events. You don't have to mind them too much. This foreign war space here just references some of those mandatory events that you will come up during the course of the game, marked with a foreign war hint here. Those cards, when played, are basically a new space in the game, and one of the factions that must fight this foreign war will be placing units on it and fight usually against independent markers. And as long as you don't remove all enemy marker from the card, usually you will have you'll be losing a benefit of one card. So basically it's like a small war that you fight on the side. And all factions will also have a section where you'll be placing markers which symbolize the VP which you got by different means. This may include, for example, cartography, which is you get through controlling and exploring space in the exploration map. And sometimes it will be VPs which only your faction can obtain, one way or the other. If you are not sure how to obtain those VP, it's quite simple. Each player has a player aid, which explains how many cards you will draw, your basic VP for keys, strategic space, and also all the special VP which only you can obtain in a way or another. And each of those special VPs have corresponding markers. For example, here, I sorted them here. And lastly, we have the used home cards. This space is important for one reason. As we mentioned previously, you will get home card in your hand every turn, which means that when you play a home card, the one which has this color matching your faction, after you play it for the event or the value, you place it here. Not in the discard pile, here. So that you make sure that you do not discard the home card at the end of the turn and you get it back. Something you have to notice too, and this is especially important if you are a Muslim player, Portugal or France, is that you may have more than 2 home cards, but you can only play 2 every turn. If you have 3 home cards and you play 2, then you have to play the third one here. If you're afraid of forgetting this rule, it's here on your player aid. And all factions will also have a section where you'll be placing markers which symbolize the VP which you got by different means. This may include, for example, cartography, which is you get through controlling and exploring space in the exploration map. And sometimes it will be VPs which only your faction can obtain, one way or the other. If you are not sure how to obtain those VP, it's quite simple. And something important is that the Spanish player doesn't have this rule. The Spanish player can play their 3 home cards every turn without losing the benefit of the third one. Lastly, on each player card, there is an available action menu with associated costs, which dictate which action you can take using command points during your turn. And you'll have military action, moving, recruiting, fighting, how to take control of spaces, naval action, diplomatic action, and how to build fortress. Some of the factions in the game will have different actions which are very specific to the kingdoms, but let's not get into the details of it for now. Complete the overview of the map and the game elements with those 2 sheets. You have one sheet mainly used for the diplomatic status. This track is used to keep track of who is allied with who is at war with who, and how much it costs to declare war on another faction. I will explain how to get in a state of war with another faction when I will be covering the diplomacy phase. And here we have the diplomatic influence table. Let's keep it very simple, but basically you have 6 minor factions mostly located around Italy, with the exception of Naval, which is between France and Spain. And all those factions has 4 corresponding markers for the 4 player. The Spanish player, the Muslim player, Portugal, and France. And you have one action that allows you, by paying the cost which is printed here, to move your marker on either of those minor faction column. And some event will dictate, hey, make a diplomatic check and see if this faction join you or not. Why you want a faction to join you? Why you want to get a minor faction to join you? It's pretty simple. Say that I play an event that, as a Spanish player, allows me to activate the minor faction called Naval, and I succeed at taking control of this event, of this faction. All the marker will move down for the turn. And if we go back to the map and we check the space that corresponds to this minor faction, you'll be able to place your marker in each space that corresponds to this minor faction, meaning that if it has keys and strategic spaces, you will get VP out of it. So overall, getting allies is pretty good, right? And finally, this part here will only be relevant from turn 3. And basically, it's only relevant for the Spanish player. Let's keep it simple, but you will have the opportunity to spend command points to potentially get your family member to get wed with pretenders from other important kingdoms and empires of Europe, and this will extend your diplomatic influence. Basically, you roll dice and you get VPs, and you can spend command point to increase the odds of getting those VP. Okay, now I will just quickly cover the sequence play. As you can see, there are many steps, but you don't really have to mind too much, because each of those small steps are mainly maintenance. The core of the game is the action phase here, but let's get back up. The first phase of the game is the card draw phase. Basically, every turn, new leaders may appear. You will get new fortress if you built some during the last turn. You get back your home card, and if you control the papacy, here the Portuguese are controlling the papacy, you get a special card called the Papal Bull card, which is a powerful 6 command point card. Then the main event deck is reshuffled, and new cards may be added every new turn. And then every player is dealt card. I'll be covering how each faction can increase the number of cards they receive. If you used resources, they will get back in the pool, where basically when you get resources, you'll be drawing from this pool when you get an event that dictates, hey, you get resources. Sometimes you will get the resources straight from the map, as a reminder. The second phase is the diplomacy phase. This is where each player might secretly hold negotiation. You split your players and they can hold talks for a few minutes, and they can make deals. I won't go into the details of those deals, but this is when you may want to create alliance between two factions. You might give random cards to other player. You can land units, the militia, the black figures, like this one. You can give resources. You can exchange ransoms for leaders which you captured and which are currently in your dungeon. You can also land your naval squadron if you want, and there are a few other options. If you are playing this game soon, if you're one of those players, I would recommend you quickly check the rulebook, at least for this section, the day before playing, because it will give you the option which can take, and some of those are really nice and you can use as leverage if you're winning a war, or For example, if you want to build a strong alliance against the winning player. And during the same diplomacy phase, after the negotiations are closed, players who have leaders which is currently in jail on another player card because they lost a battle or because of an event, who knows, you'll be able to give a card to or a resource to this player to get this leader back. And then each player would be able to declare new war. I think this is the time I should mention the impulse order. The impulse order is basically every time there is a new turn, dictates which player goes first. And every time you play a new turn, you'll start with the Muslim player, then moving to the Portuguese player, then the Spanish, and lastly the French. It is true for the main action phase when you'll be playing card, one after another, but also for all other phases where the players have to take decisions. And getting back to the diplomacy phase, for example, in the war segment, the Muslim will be asked to declare wars if they want first, and then the Portugal kingdom, and then the Spanish, and then the French. You get the idea. And then before we get into the action phase, you have a small spring phase where you will be making an headline event. Okay, so the headline phase of spring is very important. You probably want to open your ear right now. It's very simple. Every faction, every player, so the Muslim, Portugal, Spain, and France, will be taking 2 cards from the hand for the headline. One card is the headline itself, an event, a home card, a monetary event, or an event without any headers, and they want this event to be implemented. So they pick this first card, and then there is a complementary card, which is only used for the CP value. The higher, the better. And basically, every faction chose those couple of cards, the one event they want to play and the one supporting card used for the CPs, and you check which player has the highest complementary card value. So in this case, the Portuguese player here played this 6 value card, but you see that actually some card will say headline event support 8 CP or any other value. And this is the value you will consider in the case you play this card for the headline event. It's not available on every card. Only some of those no event card as this. So here the Portuguese is first with 8 CP. Then both the French and the Muslim player played a 3 CP card. And the Spanish player played a 2 value card. The first player, very simple, here the Portuguese, they will get 1 VP for having won the headline. The second player, for example, here there is a tie with the French for 3. The player who is losing was the least number of VP, so here the Muslim are behind the French, they will win the tie, so the Muslim will go second. They don't win a victory point, but they will be rolling a dice to potentially get a VP. You'll get the details if you read the rulebook. The third player, who will be the French, still get to implement their events, like the first and second players, but they don't get any VP straight away or potentially. And lastly, the last player just lose this event for being last, so be careful. The last thing which is worth mentioning for the headline phase is that you can only play a home card, a mandatory event, or a regular event as an headline. You cannot play a response card or a combat card. Right after the headline event, you will have the opportunity to move a naval squadron from the main map to the exploration map. Naval squadron in the exploration map will help protecting your settlements from enemy piracy and also to move back the resources at the end of the turn from the settlements that you conquered. Then you have the troop deployment phase. Very simple. Usually you'll have the opportunity to move one of your formation from a home space to another space to prepare for the turn. Just enter the bulk of the game, the action phase. In impulse order, each player play a card from their hand for the event or the CP value, and going back and forth until all players have passed, you play your cards. Very simple. Alright, and then after the action phase ended, you have the winter phase, which is like one of those big maintenance phase where people go back home and you reset some of the map status. I won't go too much into detail, but things which you have to keep in mind is that at this point some events might resolve automatically. Some of the militias, which are like the black units like this, if they are not in a home space, there is a chance they might disband and you will need to build them again. More importantly, you will be returning your formation. If you have a formation which is not in a home space or in a fortress, the game will dictate you to move back this formation back home or back in a fortress to spend the winter in. Another important point is that you will also get the opportunity to add one regular unit for each faction, which means, for example, the Portugal player, which control the pink Portugal units, will get the opportunity to add one unit in anywhere in the kingdom. But as they also control the Beltranejos, you'll also get the opportunity to add one regular in one of the home space of the Beltranejos. And by the way, I think I forgot to mention, but some of those space have two colors. It's very simple. At the start of the game, the space is controlled by the bottom faction, the color of the bottom faction, and whenever this space is get controlled by the upper one, then it becomes a home space for this faction. For example, Burgos is a space that starts as a Beltranejos home space, but if it gets conquered by the Royaume of Castille, then it becomes a Castille home space. Then that's the time where you get resources potentially from trade. I will be mentioning that a bit later when I cover each faction main points of interest. You will also hand any alliance. Alliance can only last for one turn if you determine that you were entering an alliance with another player. And lastly, if a minor faction was resolved for the turn, meaning that it was potentially given control to one of the player, or even deactivate, meaning that if it was deactivated, the player who has control of this minor faction lost it, then this thing resets. And you see that some of the space has a color, which means this is where you place the marker when it gets reset. If there is no color for the other faction, you just put it on the starting level. And then you have a small phase where the Spanish player roll dice to see if they successfully get some of their children wed with another important family in Europe. You know, it's this part here. It looks complicated, but basically, once again, it's very simple. You can advance your interest here by moving, you know, this. You spend CPs to move those markers here, and at the end of a turn, you roll a dice. The further it is on this track, the easier it gets for the wedding to be successful. Quite simple. And then you get VPs. Finally, the last phase in each turn is the victory determination phase. Once again, you can win by getting all your keys on the map, but this may happen before the end of the turn. Most importantly, from turn 4, if you have more than 7 VPs than everyone else, you win an hegemonic victory, I believe that's how it's called. And if it's turn 7, which is the last turn, then we check whoever has the most victory points, and they won. Now I quickly want to mention what those action does. Move formation in clear. You use those black lines to move one stack, it can be several units, from one space to the other. Move formation overpass, dash connection. If you have to move a stack of units using one of those dash lines, then you go overpass, spending 2 command points. By the way, if one of your formation doesn't have a leader, there can be up to 4 land units in this stack, not including the cavalry and the artillery, once again. Recruit militia infantry and recruit regular infantry, cavalry. You pay the cost of the action, militias are cheaper, and then you place them in one of your home space. You cannot build units in a space which is not one of your home space. Even if you control this space, take the example here of Serré, even if I control this one, I cannot build units directly there unless it's an event that clearly dictates that you can build units anywhere you want. A little bit more expensive, but they're also slightly more effective in battle. I will explain why very soon. Once again, you just pay 2 CP and you place your regular in one of your home key. And lastly, the cavalry, which has a horse symbol, you pay 3 CP and you place it in a home space. There are also artillery markers, I think they are around, but only France and Spain have those and in very limited numbers. A fortified space for 1 value. I thought it's quite straightforward. Let's say that Isabella arrived in the space of Barcelona, which is a square key, and thus it's fortified, and it's started to lay siege previously. When you move a stack and you arrive in an enemy fortified space, if you want to take control of this space, you have to stop moving, and you cannot assault the space immediately. You have to wait for the next card play, at least, to take the action which I mentioned previously, the assault action, to try to take control of this space. Usually, you want to bring more units that they are inside. Another consideration is that the fortified space can only have up to 4 units. If there is more than 4 units in this space, then you'll be fighting a land battle unless the defender decide to move inside the wall and leave the other units to move in adjacent space if they can roll dice and succeed, or to fight a land battle with the stack that just arrived. Another important mention is that to be able to launch an assault, you must be able to create a line of communication from the space which you are sieging back to a home key of this stack. Which means, like, for example, Isabella, she can go through those red space because she is allied with the Kingdom of Aragon. It's the same faction. She can trace back using, for example, those connections here. So she can launch an assault if she wants. Because Barcelona is a port, if there was a naval squadron owned by the Catalonians here in the port, and the Spanish doesn't have at least more naval squadron than this in the adjacent space, then they cannot assault the space because basically they cannot block us, the port. So if you're besieging a port space, keep in mind that you have to bring your armada to be able to blockade the port. We just mentioned the siege, but what about the regular battle, the one which you fight on land? Well, if for whatever reason your stack arrive in a space, let's say for the sake of it that Isabella is arriving in this space, Teruel, which is just one of those regular shaped, circle-shaped space, then when the stack of Isabella arrive, the player owning this stack will have the opportunity to roll dice if they want to escape to an adjacent space which is friendly to them. In this case, the Catalonia's player will be stuck because this is owned by the Portugal player. This is owned by the Spanish player, so they wouldn't have a choice. When this stack arrives, they will have to fight a land battle. In this case, it's quite simple. You just check whatever is in this stack and you make math. By saying making math, what I mean is that you're going to add up some of those values together to check how many dice you're going to roll. Each fight is a game of rolling dice and see how many hits you score. Hits in a fight are 5 and 6s. Sometimes it will be 4. You'll see why. What you check first, if you stack as a leader, you're going to consider the common value here, or whatever it's called, and this one, for example, is going to give us 1 dice. And then you add up the value of the token. For example, here, the Spanish have a 6 value total here, plus 1 from the leader. The Catalonians have 4 dice, and because they are defending, because the fight was initiated on the Spanish impulse, they get 1 more dice for being the defender. Then you check, is there any cavalry in your stack? If yes, you have a choice of making a cavalry charge. Let's not get too much into details, but basically you can add more dice by saying, hey, I'm going to do a cavalry charge, giving you more roll, but it also means that if you take casualties or hits, the cavalry will have to go first. They charge and, well, they die, but choice. Once you add up all the dice which you will be rolling, which, for example, in this case, let's say the Spanish player wants to keep the cavalry for later, and they say, I'm not going to charge, you'll be rolling the dice. So here, that will be 7. Before rolling the dice, your opponents or you will have the opportunity to play combat card, which were those black card with a label, which may add rolls to the fight most of the time. If no events are played, you just sum up all your dice, you roll, and you're going to check how many 6s and 5 you have. Each of those 6 and 5 will be considered hits on your enemies. If you roll a 4, there is a possibility that the 4 might be a hit. I won't go too much into details, but 4s are the reason why you want to have regulars in your stack. The more regulars you have, the more hits you may score from 4 up to 2. Here, let's keep it simple. Let's say the Spanish rolled 3 hits and the Catalonians 1 hit. You have to remove casualties and you have to distribute the hits between militias and regulars and cavalries. Meaning if I take 3 hits or 1 hit as a Spanish player, I could just remove one of the militias. I will replace these 2 with a 1. And if I can't replace, then too bad, it's completely removed. The Catalonians here, if they take 3 hits, quite simple, I just remove those 3. But if you have a mix of militias and other kind of units, then you have to balance them out. You cannot just remove militias. If this fight was a disaster and all the Spanish units were destroyed, then Isabella would have been captured. Naval battles are quite similar. If you move into a sea zone and then a naval battle starts, then you just add up those numbers here. One figure is 1 roll. You add the command rating of any naval leader, for example here 2 for Camel Race, and you roll this number of dice. Every 2 hits will remove an enemy squadron, and then if there is any remainder, the player who won the battle by scoring more hits will get to remove another one. If all of the naval squadron are removed in a stack with a naval leader, you just place the leader on the next turn on the track here. And same for the units which are removed in battle here. They just go on this track and they will be returned to the player on the next turn. Land units never returned here on the next turn. They just go back on the player pool, ready to be built. Okay, then we have the control action. This one is quite simple. Let's say here the Beltranejos want to take control of Vizcaya. They want to add one of their marker to this space. Then if they want to take control of a round space like this, which is an unfortified space, if there is no enemy adjacent to the space, they can just straight away place one of the control marker, which I don't have here, so to illustrate I would just use a French marker. But if I'm the Beltranejos, I won't take control of either of the space. As long as I have an adjacent unit and there is no adjacent enemy units next to this space, I can spend 1 CP to take control of it. Why you won't take control of the space? They might give you VP in some case, or on some other, they might also allow you to trace a line of communication. If there is an enemy unit next to the space you want to take control of, let's say here I would like to take control of Laredo, I will need to move this unit here and then spend a CP to take control of it, because this Spanish unit here, which is enemy with this one, prevents me to take control straight away from the adjacent space. Next are the strategic space. You need to be on the space and then to spend 1 command point to take control of it. Keep in mind, every time you take control of a triangle space, you get 1 victory point. Or if you lose control of a strategic space, you lose 1 victory point. So in this case, if the Beltranejos take control of Vitoria, they will get 1 VP and the Spanish player would lose 1 VP. Keys and fortress, which are the fortified space in this game, are slightly different. You don't have to spend CP to take control of it, but you have to siege those and completely eliminate the opponent to be able to take control of it. If you arrive in a space you want to siege, but there is no defenders, you still have to roll dice to see if you score at least more hits than the fortress. The fortress will roll 1 dice always when you assault it. So it's not guaranteed that you can take control of the space just by taking some units there and besieging it. Be careful of that. If you successfully besiege a fortress or a key and take control of it, that's the time where you will be placing a control marker. You will note that some of those control markers of the Spanish have this small Nasrid kingdom symbol. It means that every time you control a Nasrid home space with the Spanish, you have to use those. You will use those to mark VP as the Spanish for the Reconquista. I will go a little bit quicker for the naval action. It's quite simple. You can build naus, which are the units you will use to explore the New World. You can build naval squadron directly into the exploration map if you successfully explored this section of the exploration map. You can also build the naval squadron directly into the map in a port which you control. I could spend 2 command points to build directly in this port, for example, as a Spanish player. And the main action you can take at sea is move and initiate piracy or naval transport. Naval transport, let's quickly go over it, but basically you can use units as a way to move around across the sea. So if I have a naval unit here in the Alboran Sea, I could do a naval transport, meaning I could take a stack of units, up to 5 land units, including leaders, not including leaders, sorry, and move them across the sea towards a port of destination. If it's not controlled, of course, you'll have to siege it, and you have to be able to control a line of communication back to your home space, which may be difficult sometimes. The naval move action, which costs 1 CP, allows you to move all your naval units once. So if, as a Spanish, I decide to take a naval move action, I could move this squadron here, I could move this squadron here from the port of Denia to the... Let's remove those units, so you don't have to. Barbary Coast, and any of my minor ally, if I was, for example, allied with Genoa as a Spanish, I could also move my minor allies naval squadron. And when you move this way, I won't go too much into details, but if you have enemy in adjacent port or sea zone, they might be able to intercept you. They might be able to roll a dice, and if they succeed, to intercept you in this space, and then a naval battle may start. And the same way, when you enter a space with your naval squadrons or the naval units in a space where you have an enemy, if Genoa was my enemy, they will have the option to roll a dice to potentially escape. The same kind of action also exists on land. You can intercept or escape enemies coming into your space. We have the piracy. Piracy, it's quite simple. Let's say I have those squadrons here in the Barbary Coast. I will be rolling dice, and I count all the enemy fortress in this area after I selected the faction I'm targeting for piracy. So for example, if I was a Spanish player and I say, alright, I want to target the Muslim player here in the Barbary Coast, you check how many fortress they have in adjacent to this sea zone, and then you'll be rolling dice, and if you hit, you might be able to get cards, VPs, or resources. Okay, then we have the diplomatic influence. Quite simple. You check the cost of shifting your influence on the chart, and for example, I could spend 1 CP as a Spanish player to move my influence with Navarre 1, and you can do so several times on the same turn. Sometimes you have to pay more. The papacy costs more CP to move around your marker. You would want to increase your influence. I think I mentioned it already, but there will be events that dictate to check when the status of a minor faction is done. Every faction might roll dice, or if you're really doing good, you might get control of this minor faction directly. Also, if one of the factions declare war on one of those minor factions to get control of the key militarily, for example, there will be a check, and if you're ahead on this table, you have a good chance to take control, to assist this minor faction in the war. Basically, you come to the rescue. Okay, and lastly, we have the build fortress thing. Very simple. You spend CPs, and you can place a fortress in an unfortified space. I don't think you can do it in strategic space, which are the jungles, but those round shape home space, you can build fortress on it, and then it's considered the same as those star shape fortress space. You can also build fortress on your settlement. This will allow you to defend against piracy attempts on the exploration map. Piracy may be done both on the main map, but also in the exploration map. Okay, lastly, before talking about each faction, I want to mention back the trade thing. In the winter phase, at the end of each turn, each faction will have an opportunity, which is unique to the faction, to maybe score resources. The Spanish player, you have this La Mesta marker, which may move at the start of new turns, and basically you want to check if you are able to trace a line of communication to ports in the Cantabrian Sea. The more ports you can link to this marker here, the better are the odds at getting resources at the end of the turn. And so, for example, here, La Mesta is in Aravelo, which is an enemy control space. So there won't be any opportunity to improve the odds at scoring resources at the end of the turn for the Spanish trade. What I was mentioning, the Mesta trade table, you check how many ports you can link to and you get a better hold at the roll. You roll 2 dice and potentially you get resources. For the French player, they do the same, and they can improve those odds by spending CPs on those North Sea markers. That's an action which is available on the player aid card. They can only do so after signing a treaty, which is an event. Also have another role at the end of the turn, the French Mediterranean trade, so basically how good they did business-wise trading goods across the Mediterranean Sea. And the more cities in Italy they control, especially Genoa, Florence and Venice, the better the odds to get resources at this role, with this role. Or the faction, if they control the city of La Cusa, which is an independent city-state here on the edge, on the east edge of the map, if you control this space, not only you'll get a VP, but also you'll be able to roll on this table, the trade with Ragusa table. It's another way to get resources. Muslim player, you'll see that on the North African side of the map, there are those caravan space here, which can hold resources. So let me take an actual resources from here, and at the end of the turn you check the resources which are here, and if they are able to connect to a port, I think but for the Fez caravan they have to connect to Tangier, they will be able to get these resources. So as a Muslim player, you have to make sure you're able to have some connection on the coast to be able to get those resources. There is no rule. You just check if you can trace this line of communication, and if the answer is yes, then you get these resources. There is one for Fez, one for Marrakesh, and later on, from turn 4, the Berbers, the Tlemcen caravan. Okay, and lastly, another thing that happens at the end of the turn is, let's say, for example, here, the Portuguese built settlements in this part of the expression map. You see that each settlement has a resource here, and you'll be rolling dice to see if you can take back those resources back home. If you control the Canary Islands, this will favor you. The Canary Islands are important for this, to be able to get those resources back home, especially for the Spanish and the Portuguese the Portuguese players. The Muslim player might be able to snatch those resources if you roll badly. So having squadrons on the exploration map will help you carrying back those goods. That's something you can do. One last quick mention while we are on the exploration map. If you have a squadron or corsairs on an exploration space, you can also initiate piracy against a player that has a settlement in this area. And if you do good, you might be able to plunder the resources that this faction might have been able to get back home at the end of the turn. For the sequence of play, now before concluding, I just want to quickly mention some of the perks and cons of each faction. Starting with the French, you will see that they have this thing in the upper right corner of the map. This is the station of the Kingdom of France, with some of the most important duchies or whatever it is around the Kingdom of France. There's 6 of those, and basically what the number means, the higher it is, the more favor you have with this house. And as a French player, you can use CPs, you can expand CP to increase your station or your standing, I believe that's how it's called, with each of those houses. And at the start of your turn, you will be rolling a dice for each of those tracks. And if the dice match or is lower than the value where the marker currently is, then you will get a card. You have a base number of cards at the start of your turn, which is equal to the charisma of your current leader. But then what they call the consolidated monarch power, it's basically this. You increase those tracks, you roll dice. The better, the higher it is, the more likely you will get a card. Two things also, when you reach the top of this track, you will obtain a VP the first time the track gets there. It can be decreased by events. And also, to be able to benefit from this house roll, you have to check the main map, and you will see that some of the space have the same symbol here. Each house has a corresponding symbol on the map. And if you don't control this space, then you don't even roll on the map. The exception being the Foix Navarre house. You don't increase on the track using CPs for this one. It's either you get a military control of Navarre, which is here, and then you be rolling on a 3, or if you get allied with the Foix Navarre Manor Halai, which is here, then you will be rolling on the political thing here. Basic strategy for France, or the thing you have to remember, you are located on the map in a way that it's not too difficult to defend against the Spanish faction. But one thing you have to keep in mind, you will have a lot of those foreign wars event cards, which I previously mentioned. Some of those event cards will be stating, the French are at war with Burgundy or with the British. And then you will have to place units on this card and spend CPs to fight against grey units. And until you remove all the units on this card, then those units you have on this card cannot be used for any other thing. So that's one thing as the French you have to keep in mind. You have several foreign wars cards that may come up. Also, on the French card, you'll see this England garrison box with some units and leaders. Basically, that's something where you have to resolve through treaties. I don't want to cover the treaties on video because it's a bit complicated. You have to look it up on the rulebook, but you can sign treaties that will help you get those things away, for example, and you can use them, or that will also allow you to start building up toward conquering Italy. As the French player, please check the rule again, but there's some of those minor factions, those city-states in Italy, you cannot declare war on them unless you have signed those treaties, which is usually you expend a card to make an agreement, and you give a card to another player, or you give some space to another player. For example, I believe that the Treaty of Barcelona, you'll be giving away some space near the French-Spanish border to be able to sign it. As a good pool of military units, so usually you will be able to stand your ground against the Spanish. Your home card also allows you to build quickly, so keep that in mind. Also control the Catalonia's faction as the French player. Let's put it in a nutshell. As the Catalonians, you have to protect Barcelona. If the Spanish player conquer Barcelona, then the Catalonia's units will be out and you lose control of them. And the Spanish player gets some VPs, and the longer Barcelona holds, the more VP you will get as well. That's something you have to keep in mind as a French. Portugal also has some kind of advantage, to defend against the Spanish player. They have this line of fortress here. So geographically speaking, they are not doing too bad. But you don't have as many units as the Spanish or France, so that's something you have to consider. What's something you want to consider as Portugal is that you have a lot of the Naos, the naval units that allows you to explore the new world. So as a Portugal player, you will be very good at exploring the exploration map. And actually, if you play the long scenario, you will be the only player on the first couple of turns that will be able to explore along the coast of Africa and later on the other section on the map. Also, if you play the long scenario, you will see that you will start at war with the Spanish player, and that's something you can't just say, hey, let's make peace. Please check the rulebook section that talks about the peace of Alvacovas, I believe. I'm sorry if the name is not right, but that's called the peace of Alvacovas, and that's an event that may come up or something you might agree on with the Spanish player from turn 3, and that dictates that completely change the game for you. This treaty is also going to modify your relationship with your second faction, which is the Beltranejos here, and which is one of the second goal of the Portuguese player is for those green guys here to hold as longer as they can and to conquer as many Spanish spaces as they can, because at some point those guys are going to surrender if all of the keys are controlled, and when they surrender, depending how well you did, you might get VPs. The Muslim player is pretty good at piracy. That's the one faction that can build Corsair for quite cheap, and as such make more piracy roll easily. They also have a good geographic advantage because most of the time the other faction will have to make naval moves, place naval squadron in those sea zones if they want to besiege the fortress that borders the Mediterranean Sea. So that's pretty good for you. Be careful to hold your space here, but as you can see, also the Portuguese starts in control of some of the keys and fortress alongside the Atlantic. Your second faction, or this one, is the North African Alliance faction, the light green one. This one, the Nasrid Kingdom, your objective with those guys is to hold as much as possible against the military might of the Spanish. The longer you hold, the most VP you will get out of those guys, and it's kind of inevitable because the Spanish will get more card than you, and they can build units very quickly using the card. So basically, make sure to not lose your keys in the south of Spain. Try to hold the Reconquista as long as you can. And lastly, we have Spain. Spain, I think, if one of your players already played Here I Stand or Virgin Queen, you probably want to, and they are well accustomed with the rule sets, you probably want to give control of Spain and France to those players, because Spain is very complicated. You have to manage the Portuguese, you have to manage the Catalan insurrection, you have to contain the Beltranejos who are trying to take the Castille. They are pretenders to the throne of Castille. You have to fight those guys as well. You have to make sure the French are staying on the side of the Pyrenees. You also have spaces in Italy. This faction is quite complicated, to be honest, but if you have a good player at Here I Stand or, Virgin Queen, that's probably a good fit for them, especially if they like the Holy Roman Empire in Here I Stand. They are everywhere and you have a lot to do. But the good thing is you have a lot of cards, and also your home cards are extremely good. Especially Tanto Monta. The Tanto Monta home card allows you to get a card back from the the discard pile. This one is really good, with some exception though. Once again, as a Spanish player from turn 3, you will have to manage this wall waiting thing where you spend points to move your pretenders on this table, and then at the end of the turn you'll be rolling dice to see if you get VPs out of the waiting. Lastly, one remarkable point for the Spanish is that They also get a base number of cards, like the French. And as the French may get additional card based on the space they control. You will see those symbols here, means that if you control this space, depending on the turn, you'll see there is a table on the rulebook or on the table sheets. You'll be rolling dice to see if you score more cards. So be on the lookout for the space with the Spanish player symbol here, because if you conquer or if you hold into the space, that's potentially more cards for you. And you will see that some of the space are actually on the French side. Okay, that's about it for the overview of Tanto Monta. I didn't go in the details of the rules. The rulebook is 60 pages long, so if you are the host of the game, if you're organizing a game of Tanto Monta, please make sure to be the one player that reads the rules and explain them in details during the course of play. Because if you ask your player to just read those 60 pages without the support of the map and the 8 cards and the 8 sheets, it would just be gibberish to them. They won't understand a thing. One thing you can ask your player to do is attribute the faction before the game day, so that they can check at least the section of the rulebook which is proper to the faction. Each faction in the rulebook has a chapter that will explain how they can score VPs, their own bonus VPs. So that's probably something they want to check. You can also ask your player to at least check how the space and cards system works. I think that's the first dozen of pages of the rulebook cover the basics. So that's something you can do. Otherwise, yeah, I would also recommend, there are 2 scenarios. Let me remove those things here. There are 2 scenarios in the game. One will cover 7 turns, starting on turn 1, and one will start on turn 4, which is the short scenario. My advice is, the first time you'll be playing this game, start with the short scenario. Not only, of course, it will take a shorter time, but the longer scenario, the first 3 turns have so many exceptions which are unique to those turns, which just make the whole thing more complicated. So on your first game, the first time you're going to play Tanto Monta, please play the short scenario. It just makes things easier, and you will start directly with the royal table thing. You don't have to learn this during the middle of the game. You will also start with those space which are not active on the 3 first turns. Really, my recommendation is just go for the short scenario, and that will make everyone's life easier. Okay, and of course, lastly, on the game day, please explain this to your players. Each player has an 8 card which lists how they can score VPs, and that's just going to make their life easier. You'll see that sometimes the VP are related to a space they have to control, and you may have noticed in the video I marked some of the space with faction sticker that just make things easier for everyone. For example, the space around Naples are quite important for the Spanish and the French. That's the way they might score VPs. There is an event that allows them to score VPs depending on if they control a space or not. If you ask your players, if you don't give hints for your player where those spaces are, they're just going to get lost. So probably that's something, a small overview you want to give them before getting started. And lastly, last advice, maybe play a turn for nothing. Just play the 4th turn. If you play the short scenario, just play the 4th turn up to the last action phase. Just have everyone play the card, and this way the player will understand the basic, the fundamentals of their faction. That's my last advice. I hope this video helped you, and if you have any correction to make, there will be probably mistake in the things I said, please feel free to comment. And well, thank you for listening. Good game.